Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, July 27th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a Kamala Harris, Josh Shapiro, and Donald Trump, JD Vance 2024 election matchup. Now, this is my first time making an election prediction of the 2024 cycle since Donald Trump is no longer facing against Joe Biden in this election. My last prediction I published was immediately in the aftermath of the debate that showed Donald Trump winning against Joe Biden, 312 electoral votes to to Joe Biden's 226. So Donald Trump very clearly with a decisive victory over the incumbent president, winning back states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and flipping Nevada for the first time since 2004. It was a very, very, very strong showing for Republicans on this map here. But now let's take a look at a 2024 cycle in which Kamala Harris, and she has not announced who she's deciding to choose as her vice presidential running mate. I imagine it'll be someone like Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly. And so I decided that in the spirit of it all, let's make an election prediction between Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro and Donald Trump and JD Vance. Tomorrow, I will be releasing a prediction of Kamala Harris and Mark Kelly, and then Kamala Harris and Roy Cooper, and going through the options because we have until August 7th, and I really want to just compare the maps, see where regional advantages come into play, see where certain candidates can provide increased points of confidence and points of contention in some battleground states. And so keep in mind that this is not an election prediction of just Kamala Harris. I think that the main thing that we've understood thus far is that vice presidential nominees should almost always add. If you watch the video today on JD Vance, you will know that it's certainly not the case for everybody. But in most cases, the vice presidential nominee should always add. And in this circumstance, I can say without a doubt that I believe that Josh Shapiro does, in fact, add a lot to the ticket. And we will see what that does for our 2024 presidential election prediction. So at baseline, I'm going to go ahead and not waste our time and spend time talking about why Kamala Harris will win my home state of Maryland. That's sort of said and done for and understood to be exactly how the election goes in many of these states. These are safe states. These are states that we know are going to go to individual candidates regardless, truly said, of what happens on the national level. This means that, a candidate could promise to, do the craziest things, and whichever way the political party lean of the state is, if it's been over 15 points before, chances are it's going back to the Republican or Democratic column. So moving back up here, let me go ahead and just make this a little bit smaller. I know it's a little bit of an inconvenience seeing the map here, seeing the name so small, but just keep in mind it's Kamala Harris, Josh Shapiro, Donald Trump, JD Vance. Now, I want to go ahead and, not, again, waste our time about some of these states, but we're pretty much down to the real competitive states of the election cycle, 232 toss-up electoral votes that Donald Trump, for the most part, in the last election prediction, really had a very strong chance with. He was doing very well in the states in the immediate aftermath of the debate with new polls and new data that pretty much showed that Donald Trump was in a very strong position against Joe Biden. This time around, we are seeing that Kamala Harris is much more well-positioned, especially with somebody like Josh Shapiro on the ticket. Now, this doesn't mean that states like Iowa and Ohio won't be pretty strong for the Republican Party. JD Vance, especially coming from the state of Ohio, while he wasn't super strong as this electoral juggernaut back in 2022, which he was not, he underperformed Donald Trump. Donald Trump still carries him across the finish line in Ohio, and honestly, it wasn't really a swing state to begin with, so there was no real urgency behind moving that state over. Now, what's interesting, though, is that Iowa and Ohio pretty much vote together, and I do think many of the other states are also going to vote together. But these two states in particular, I think, will be largely unmoved by a Josh Shapiro pick, and largely unmoved, too, by Kamala Harris moving up to the role as the presidential nominee. Neither of these two states, in any circumstance, even with someone like Sherrod Brown, would I imagine Ohio or Iowa going to the Democratic Party. These states are pretty strong for the GOP, and I decide that very early on, these are states that are going to be won by the Republican Party. Now, with Josh Shapiro on the ticket, I do think Democrats are going to lock down some states that they should expect to lock down. States like Maine, they should lock down. New Hampshire, they should lock down. New numbers out of New Hampshire show Kamala Harris running even with Joe Biden in the last election. Minnesota would lock down. Virginia would lock down. Colorado, New Mexico, no real points of contention there for Donald Trump. Now, that's different than the map here with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. New Mexico became far narrower. Virginia went down from being a 10-point-plus state in 2020 to being less than 5. Minnesota went down to less than 5. New Hampshire went down to less than 5. Maine went down to less than 5. So to put things into perspective, already at baseline, Kamala Harris is outperforming Joe Biden in key battleground states, ones that Republicans are, in fact, trying to make a play for. They're investing in states like Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and also New Jersey. I don't know why. It's a safe blue state. It won't be anything but that. But, delusion is a very powerful drug. I think what we're looking at here is Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro, with them both on the ticket, really doing well in these battleground states and locking them down. And it also throws some other things back into consideration. Now, bringing ourselves up to 225, Kamala Harris bringing ourselves up to 148 for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. They also have their fair share of states. In my last prediction, I had Texas and Florida as likely red states. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the state of Texas's characterization, but I do think Florida largely stays in this, likely Republican column. I haven't seen much data out of the state of Florida other than the fact that Kamala Harris, yes, I think would perform better amongst minority voters, would perform better amongst Hispanic voters in the state. It isn't enough for me to say that it's moving over from the likely Republican column. Donald Trump and Republicans have built up such an expensive voting network in the state, really have maintained control across it over the past 3 years. So Florida, for now, I'd say until proven otherwise, with consistent data points, Florida is going to be a likely red state. Same thing in Maine's 2nd district. Even though I've seen 2 numbers out there showing Kamala Harris down 4, I imagine that that's more rooted in reality around 5 to 6 points. And I also will just say, sometimes the polls in congressional districts aren't the most accurate. I think for this case, because it is a state that does break down by district, they tend to be more accurate. But with that being said, I don't think Josh Shapiro really sways over Maine's 2nd district voters as much as we would think in another part of the state, not another part of the state, other regions of the country, which I think is true. Right now, Maine's 2nd goes to Donald Trump. So that brings Donald Trump up to 179 electoral votes, but a very big one that he's going to win is the state of Texas. I do think that regardless of who Kamala Harris chooses for VP, I think Mark Kelly would be slightly better for the Texas region, but I do think that Kamala Harris on her own will bring Texas down to being a 4 to 5 point state. And that's not because I think Texas is competitive, but rather because I think Texas is just moving in a leftward direction, even if Kamala Harris does not win the presidential election. We saw this happen in 2016, just the demographics and the shifts that have been happening over the state over the past century that we've seen, not century, but in this century. In 2012, we really saw it in full force, but it was mostly on display during George W. Bush's elections. In 2000, he won the state by 21. In 2004, he won it by 23. Jumping over 2008, very strong year for Republicans even then, though. Republicans, John McCain won Texas by 12 points. It was never even a point of consideration. Texas went to Romney then by 16 points, but then came Donald Trump. Despite Hillary Clinton, you can see this in the comparisons 2016 versus 2012, almost every state shifted to the right, quite significantly for some. Iowa by 15 points, Ohio by 11, Michigan by 10. Texas actually shifted 7 points to the left. And so could you imagine if Hillary Clinton had won the presidency, it'd probably be far more than just a 7-point victory. Then in 2020, we saw that Texas shifted even 3 points more to the left. And I can imagine that although I did expect Donald Trump to do better against Joe Biden in Texas, I do think Kamala Harris, just at baseline, based on trends we've been seeing, will narrow down Texas. And while it will ultimately still go to Donald Trump with its 40 electoral votes, it'll put it more in contention and in competitive nature for future elections. Now here we are. Less than 100 toss-up electoral votes between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, a very, very close race that will be determined by some very crucial states. Now, Nebraska's 2nd. I think with Josh Shapiro on the ticket, you're talking about locking down suburban voters. That's how you do it, with Josh Shapiro and Kamala Harris. Suburban voters, especially those on the outskirts of Omaha, the region, the congressional district that is necessary to win, Democrats have it. They had it under Biden, even in my last prediction, where I saw Biden losing a number of battleground states. We still had him winning Nebraska 2nd. Today, I think he wins, Kamala Harris, wins the Nebraska matchup against Donald Trump. And so here we are, now down to 93 electoral votes. We can get the very obvious prediction out of the way from Josh Shapiro's home state of Pennsylvania. New data shows that Josh Shapiro on the ticket here would win Pennsylvania by roughly 10 points on his own. Now, I do think he offers a tremendous value add in his own home state. I don't know if I would go so far as to saying that Pennsylvania would be a state that Josh Shapiro wins with 6-7 points like we would see in some other circumstances. I do absolutely commend the fact that he won by 15 points back in 2022. But that wasn't without major circumstances going in his favor. Doug Mastriano attended January 6th. He was a state senator that had been long known very negatively across the state. The Republican Governors Association did not invest in the primary, refused to fund him in the general election. And so while Doug Mastriano was a very bad candidate and Josh Shapiro proved he was very strong, today he comes in at a 57% approval rating, I would not go so far as to say when it's a nationalized race that he would win by anywhere more than 5 points. And so Pennsylvania becomes a lean blue state, but that's a huge chunk of the puzzle that Democrats really need to win this election. Now, I still think Donald Trump comes ahead in a state like North Carolina, but I think it gets very, very narrow. I think Kamala Harris has inspired specifically minority voters and black voters in areas where Democrats need it the most in North Carolina, and I think it'll do them justice in down ballot races, especially the governor's race. We probably will see Josh Stein winning anywhere from 3 to 6 points, but on the presidential level, Donald Trump still comes out ahead. I don't think Josh Shapiro or Kamala Harris boost up enough unless you're seeing someone like Roy Cooper in the race. North Carolina, though, very different coalition. we're finding that she will do better than Joe Biden did, better than Hillary Clinton did, better than Obama did in 2012, but not enough to push her past the finish line in North Carolina. Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, I'm going to tackle those really separately because I want to go ahead and characterize the remainder two states, Wisconsin and Michigan. And with Josh Shapiro on the ticket, I genuinely believe Wisconsin goes to Kamala Harris, and so does Michigan. And that's enough to win the presidency. Now, I don't think Josh Shapiro moves enough of the needle to make Wisconsin a likely or even lean blue state. It's going to be close, and it was close in the last election, and that's really an unavoidable fact. Wisconsin in the past two races has been competitive, and historically speaking, Wisconsin has actually been a far more competitive state than we realize. You can take a look. In 2016, decided by 0.76. 2020, decided by 0.63. It was really only Obama who had a unique appeal to the Rust Belt states that made Wisconsin a 7-point state, that made Wisconsin a 14-point state, because in the election prior, Wisconsin was won by 0.38. In the election prior to that one, Wisconsin was won by 0.22. And really, it was only Bill Clinton who, with third-party vote split, was able to make Wisconsin a pretty strong Democratic state. And so Barack Obama, Bill Clinton were the last two to really do it. But in those off elections, 2000, 2004, 2020, 2016, Wisconsin has been competitive, and I expect it to be competitive again. On the flip side of things, when it comes down to Michigan, I think Kamala Harris does a very good job at bringing back groups of the Democratic base that were previously turned away. I think Josh Shapiro may do some similar things that President Biden did. For example, I think that Governor Shapiro's comments surrounding encampments on university campuses might be a point of attack that not Republicans, but members of the left wing that focused on the Pass the Torch campaign, on the Uncommitted campaign, on pretty much everything anti-Joe Biden. I can imagine it being translated to Governor Josh Shapiro. But a VP nom is very different than someone at the top of the ticket. And Kamala Harris has done a lot more, I would say, in terms of being vocal, for, various different things. And I also will say, and I mean this earnestly, I do think that Josh Shapiro, for all that we've seen, come up as a point of consideration, positive or negative, we haven't really seen him try it on the national level. And so I wouldn't go so far as to say Michigan is now likely blue, Wisconsin is likely blue, or even, quite frankly, Pennsylvania, because the governor's race is very separate and very different than what we would see on a Senate race, even a House race in a competitive swing district. Those things are ran and executed differently, and while Josh Shapiro, I do agree, would be a value add in the Rust Belt, I'm not going to go so far as to say that he slam dunks this election for Kamala Harris, because it's very clear, one, she will be bringing a lot of these people to the finish line and over the finish line, and on the flip side of things, too, his regional advantage is where he is most advantageous, and I think that's really where we're going to see it shine through in this prediction, and we'll get to that as we go through these remaining states. So 33 toss-up electoral votes in theory don't really matter, but Kamala Harris should probably have a cushion given what we've seen in faithless electors in recent races. I'd say that Donald Trump would probably win a state like Georgia very, very narrowly. I do think Kamala Harris stands to have a very strong chance of victory, but these are elections and snapshots in time today, and I still think Donald Trump has the upper hand. The new data out of the state is promising for Kamala Harris, and I think with the right energy and momentum, enthusiasm and organizing, and money, which she has, Georgia could maintain itself as a Democratic state. Georgia would remain itself as a liberal state, as one that votes for Democratic candidates, and we would see Kamala Harris as the victor this November in that circumstance. Again, today, I have her losing the state of Georgia and North Carolina. Now, for Arizona and Nevada, I do think Donald Trump still maintains his slight but assured upper hand in the state of Arizona. We can see it in a lot of the new data out of the state that shows her down by very similar margins to Joe Biden while still improving. Similar is not good because Joe Biden was down 6-7 points across the state. She's down 4 or 5 points. I can imagine that with someone like Mark Kelly, that would be a much better coalition, and it would move it over, especially since he's ran a nationalized race. Right now, though, Arizona is a state that leans towards the right. It leans towards the Republican Party, and I do think it would be very close, very narrow, but Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have the slight upper hand because Kamala Harris needs to be doing far better on the national level for us to feel very secure in her election in victory. But it looks like it's moving in that direction and that she's on track to do that if the momentum continues, if this trend line continues, because we've seen it happen before, and it could very well happen this election. The last state I'm going to characterize is the state of Nevada, where I think that Kamala Harris can bring home a lot of the voters that were really trying to shift away from the Democratic Party in the first place. I think Joe Biden, in response to what has happened in the crisis at the southern border and immigration, has been very negative for Joe Biden. And as much as Fox News would like to use the term border czar for Kamala Harris, or whoever it might be, Associated Press, whichever news network, it's not enough to stick to the average voter because Right now, all of the things that the Republican Party has spent 3.5 years relentlessly attacking the administration have turned their energy against one person, and that's President Joe Biden. It's not as closely associated with Vice President Harris, and I will say, too, who she excites and how she excites them is the exact reason why I think Nevada would revert back to the Democratic Party compared to many previous predictions, and I think regionally speaking, too, Kamala Harris knows how to win in a region like this one, and that will translate to a victory in the state of Nevada. Now, with Josh Shapiro, Kamala Harris wins the presidency. She gets 276 electoral votes to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's 262. Closer than 2020, closer than 2016, closer than 2012, closer than 2008, closer than 2004. 20 years later, you're talking a very close and competitive race. But that's expected, that's predicted, and that can be understood, especially in our current day and age. This election will come down to the wire. And even with the strongest of VP contenders and the weakest of candidates on either side of the aisle, this race is bound to be close. But as of today, July 27th, 2024, my prediction between Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance is that Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro are elected as the next president and vice president of the United States with 276 electoral votes. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.